The evening sun was setting over the wide Texas plains, and the sky turned orange and pink as the wind brushed through the tall grass. Jack Morgan sat alone on the porch of his big ranch house, a cup of coffee in his hand. He was a tall, strong man with gray eyes and years of hard work showing in his face. The land around him stretched far into the distance, filled with horses, cattle, and quiet beauty. He had everything a man could wish for: money, land, and respect. But inside, he felt empty. Since his wife passed away years ago, his house had been silent. He had learned to trust no one, for too many people had tried to get close only for his wealth. Jack had grown tired of fake smiles and greedy hearts. He wanted to believe there were still honest souls in the world, but his hope was fading. Then one cold evening, fate decided to test his heart. A storm swept through a nearby village, destroying houses and barns. The wind roared all night, and by morning the townsfolk were moving families to nearby places for shelter. Jack sent some of his men to help. By afternoon, a wagon stopped in front of his porch. From it stepped a young widow named Clara Hale and her small son Samuel. Clara looked tired but graceful. Her clothes were plain, her hands rough from work, but her eyes carried kindness and quiet strength. She held Samuel close, a boy no older than 6 with messy hair and big brown eyes full of curiosity. The local pastor introduced them, saying Clara had lost her home and had nowhere else to go. Jack didn't say much. He looked at her once and nodded. "You can stay in the guest room till the town rebuilds," he said in a calm voice. What Clara didn't know was that Jack wasn't just a simple ranch caretaker. He was the owner of the entire land. But he didn't tell her that. Something in her honesty made him curious. He wanted to see if she was different from the others who had come before her. So he let her believe he was just a worker taking care of the place while the real owner was away. Clara thanked him softly and promised to work to repay his kindness. That very evening, she cooked dinner for everyone. Her cooking was simple: beans, cornbread, and stew. But it filled the house with warmth. Jack, sitting at the table quietly, noticed the way she served others before herself, even making sure her son ate first. After dinner, she cleaned up without being told. Her boy helped, carrying small plates with both hands. Jack found himself smiling a little, something he hadn't done in a long time. Days passed. Clara woke up before sunrise to help around the ranch. She washed clothes, cooked for the workers, and even mended torn shirts with a careful hand. Samuel followed her everywhere, sometimes feeding the chickens, sometimes watching the horses with wide eyes. Jack would often watch them from a distance. The sight of the little boy laughing in the fields reminded him of the days he had dreamed of having children of his own. But those dreams had ended with his wife's passing. At night, Clara would tell Samuel stories by the fireplace. Her voice was soft and full of love, and Jack could hear her through the thin walls. The laughter of the child mixed with the crackling fire made the old house feel alive again. Still, Jack's heart was unsure. Was this woman really as good as she seemed? Or was it another act, like the others before her who had faked kindness until they saw the gold and fine things? One night, curiosity took hold of him. He decided to test her. After dinner, he sat in his chair near the fire and pretended to fall asleep. Clara thought he was resting, his hat tilted low, his body still. She stayed quiet for a moment, then began to tidy the room. She folded the blankets, picked up Samuel's toys, and swept the floor slowly. Jack half opened his eyes just enough to see her, but kept breathing like he was asleep. After a while, Clara noticed the photo frame on the shelf. The glass was cracked, the corner broken. She picked it up gently, brushing off the dust. Inside was a faded picture, Jack and his late wife. The woman in the photo wore a white dress and had a soft smile. Clara's eyes softened. She didn't know whose picture it was, but she felt the sadness in it. She whispered, "You must have loved her very much." Jack's heart skipped a beat. No one had spoken about that photo in years. He hadn't even told Clara anything about his past, but somehow she understood the quiet pain behind it. She carefully took her own handkerchief, tore a small strip and tied it around the cracked frame to hold it together. Then she set it back on the shelf with care, her fingers brushing the wood as if she wanted to comfort the soul that once smiled there. Jack's eyes filled with tears he didn't expect. He had pretended to sleep, but he was wide awake inside. He could feel his heart thudding in his chest. He wanted to say something to thank her, but he stayed silent. For years, people had tried to impress him with words and gifts. Yet here was a poor widow who didn't even know who he truly was. fixing a broken picture because she cared. When she finished, Clara covered her son with a blanket on the couch and sat near the fire, staring at the flames. She didn't touch anything that wasn't hers. She didn't search the drawers or look for valuables. She just whispered a quiet prayer, thanking God for the roof over their heads and asking for strength to work the next day. Then she slowly went to her room. Jack stayed still for a long time after she left. The clock ticked softly in the silence. He reached for the photo and touched the tied handkerchief. For the first time in years, someone had shown kindness not for gain but for love. He leaned back, his eyes wet, his heart heavy yet peaceful. The next morning, Clara was already up making breakfast. The smell of fresh bread and coffee filled the air. She smiled politely when Jack came in, acting as if nothing special had happened. He wanted to tell her he had seen everything, but something stopped him. He wanted to see if this goodness would last when she thought no one was watching. Throughout the day, he watched her quietly. When Samuel fell while playing, she dropped everything to run to him, comforting the child and checking his scraped knee. She used her own scarf to wrap it gently. When one of the ranch workers shouted at her for accidentally spilling water, she didn't argue. She only said, "I'm sorry, sir," and cleaned the floor quietly. That calm, that patience, Jack had seen it in very few people. As the sun began to set again, Jack stood outside, looking at the horizon. Something was changing in him. He didn't feel the same coldness that had filled his heart for years. He found himself thinking of Clara's small gestures, her son's laughter, and the sound of her prayers at night. But deep down he still wanted to be sure. He decided he would test her again. Not to be cruel, but to know the truth once and for all. He wanted to know if her heart was honest even when faced with temptation. So that night after dinner, he left his wallet open on the table beside him and pretended to fall asleep once more. He wanted to see what she would do when no one was watching, and the truth she revealed would change both their lives forever. That night the ranch was quiet. The wind moved softly through the trees and the fire inside the house burned low. Jack Morgan sat again in his chair, pretending to rest after dinner. On the table beside him lay his wallet, slightly open with several bills inside. He wanted to see what the poor widow would do when faced with something that could tempt anyone. He leaned back, closed his eyes and slowed his breathing, pretending to be asleep. Clara entered the room quietly. She thought he was resting again, like before. Her soft steps moved across the wooden floor as she gathered the dishes and cleaned the table. Her son Samuel followed, yawning, his small hands rubbing his sleepy eyes. Clara smiled and said gently, "Go to bed, dear. I'll finish here." But the boy shook his head. "I'll stay with you, Mama." Jack, pretending to sleep, listened to every word. The sound of their voices filled the silent room with warmth he had missed for years. He could smell the soap she used while washing dishes and hear the faint hum of her voice as she worked. There was peace in her movements, not a trace of greed or hurry. As Clara wiped the table, her eyes fell on the wallet beside the old man. For a moment, she froze. She looked around the room, then back at him. His head was tilted, eyes closed, breathing deep. She hesitated. The open wallet showed a few dollar bills and an old folded note. Clara took a small step closer, her fingers trembling slightly. Jack's heartbeat quickened. He wondered what she would do. Would she take $1? Would she ignore it? Or would she put it away safely? Clara picked up the wallet carefully, holding it in both hands. She counted the money quietly, not to steal but to make sure it was all there. She then sighed and shook her head softly. He must be so tired. If anyone came in and saw this, they could take it. She whispered to herself. Then she placed the money neatly back, folded the wallet, and put it exactly where it had been. But before leaving, she took a small piece of paper from her apron pocket, wrote something on it, and slipped it under the wallet. Jack waited until she was gone. Then he slowly opened his eyes, reached for the note, and unfolded it with careful hands. The handwriting was soft and slightly uneven. The message was short but powerful. "Thank you for helping me and my boy. We have nothing to give, but I will work harder tomorrow to repay your kindness. Clara." For a long time, Jack sat still. The fire cracked and the shadows danced across the walls, but he didn't move. His throat tightened and his eyes became wet. He hadn't cried in years, but now he did. That small note broke something heavy inside him. It showed him that goodness still lived in people. Simple, honest goodness that no money could buy. Before dawn, Jack stood up, put on his coat, and walked outside. The cold air touched his face, but he didn't care. He saddled his horse and rode into town before the sun rose. The streets were quiet, only a few lamps burning. He went to the general store and bought new clothes for Clara and Samuel, toys for the boy, and fresh supplies for the house. Then he stopped at the post office and picked up something that had been waiting for him. A letter he had written months ago but never mailed, one he now decided to read again. It was a letter to his late wife. In it, he had written about his loneliness, how he wished for a reason to smile again. As he read it now, he whispered softly, "Maybe you sent her, Mary. Maybe you sent Clara to remind me that there's still kindness in this world." When he returned to the ranch, the sky was gold and pink. Clara was already awake, sweeping the porch while Samuel chased a chicken with laughter. Jack tied his horse and called softly, "Good morning." Clara smiled and said, "You're up early. I was about to make breakfast." He nodded, his voice calm but kind. "Before you do, there's something we need to talk about." Clara looked a little worried. She brushed her hands on her apron. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked. Jack shook his head. "No, you did something right. More than you can imagine." He stepped closer, his eyes soft. "Clara, I haven't been honest with you. I'm not the caretaker here. This ranch is mine. I own this land, the house, the cattle, everything you've been helping with." Clara froze, her eyes wide. "You? You're the owner?" she said in surprise. "Yes," Jack said quietly. "And I've been watching you. Not to spy, but to understand what kind of person you are. I pretended to be asleep the other night. Twice." Her face turned red with embarrassment. "You saw me?" "Oh, sir, I didn't mean to touch your things. I only—" He raised his hand gently. "Clara, don't be afraid. I saw everything you did. I saw you fix my wife's photo frame when you thought no one was looking. I saw you handle my wallet with care and even leave a note to thank me. Most people would have taken the money, but you didn't. You did what was right even when no one would have known otherwise." Her eyes filled with tears. "I only did what I hoped someone would do for me if I were in need," she whispered. Jack smiled softly. "And that's exactly why I wanted to thank you. You reminded me that there are still good hearts in this world." He turned toward the porch, picked up a bundle he had brought from town, and handed it to her. Inside were new clothes for her and Samuel, along with small gifts and food. Clara shook her head, overwhelmed. "I can't take this. You've already done too much." "You can," he said kindly. "And you will, because I want you and your boy to stay here, not as guests, but as part of this home. I can give you a place to live, and in return you can help manage the house. If you agree, this can be your home too." Clara pressed her hands to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Samuel looked up, confused but smiling. "Does that mean we can stay forever?" the boy asked, holding Jack's hand. Jack bent down, looked into the boy's eyes, and said, "Yes, Samuel, forever, if your mother says yes." Clara nodded slowly, unable to speak through her tears. The moment was quiet, filled with more meaning than words could carry. Days turned into weeks. The ranch, once silent, became alive again. Samuel's laughter echoed through the fields, and Clara's voice filled the kitchen with songs as she cooked. Jack felt warmth returning to his life. He helped Samuel learn to ride a small horse, built a garden for Clara, and even opened the old guest room windows to let sunlight back in. The townspeople began to talk about how the lonely rancher had changed. They said he smiled more, that his land looked brighter, and that his heart had finally found peace. One evening, as the sun went down and painted the sky in gold and red, Jack stood inside the house looking at the mantel. On it sat the photo, frame Clara had repaired that first night, his wife's picture still held together by her handkerchief. Beside it, he placed a new frame, a photo of himself, Clara, and Samuel standing together in front of the ranch, smiling. He looked at both frames for a long time, his eyes misty but calm. Then he whispered softly, "You were right, Mary. Love and goodness still live in this world." Outside, the wind carried the sound of laughter and life, and for the first time in many years, Jack's house didn't feel like a place of sorrow anymore. It felt like a home again, warm, alive, and filled with family.